The World Cup is the biggest football tournament on the planet, and players who do well usually get transfers to bigger football clubs. But some experts say that this doesn't really happen anymore. But we beg to differ. Let's find out why. Welcome to another episode of CAMFC, where we break down football developments holistically and inform the opinions of football fans while ultimately making it easier for viewers to digest. So, the FIFA World Cup is the biggest sporting event in the world, where players not only get the opportunity to represent their country, but they also get the opportunity to showcase their skills to the whole world and potential suitors. And especially at this year's edition of the World Cup, there were 48 teams from all corners of the globe. And many of those players took the opportunity to announce themselves on the world's biggest stage. Over the years, a lot of footballers have used the World Cup as an opportunity to further their club careers and move to better and bigger paying football clubs. Some examples include the likes of Djemba-Djemba and Kleberson, who moved to Manchester United, Hadji Diouf, who moved to Liverpool, Ounahi, who moved to Marseille, Mesut Özil, who moved to Real Madrid, Enzo Fernández, who moved to Chelsea, and James Rodríguez, who moved to Real Madrid. But the important thing to note is not all of these players have the same profile or backstory, because some of those players that I already mentioned were already up-and-coming wonder kids or stars in the making, even before they got to the World Cup, whilst others were obviously very unknown. Because back in the 90s and the early 2000s, players from lesser-known clubs would use the World Cup as an opportunity to showcase their skills and their abilities. And often, after successful World Cups, some of these players were able to engineer themselves moves to some massive football clubs in Europe. And sometimes these type of transfers would go totally wrong. For those of you who remember, Salif Diao, who played for a small French club called Azzedine, and then got an opportunity after the 2022 World Cup to get a massive move to Liverpool. Yeah, that turned out pretty horribly for them. On the other hand, you get players like Ji-Sung Park and P.Y. Lee, who moved from Korea to PSV Eindhoven after the 2022 World Cup, and actually, they turned out to be brilliant signings. But as the 2026 World Cup has come to an end, the one question still remains. Are World Cup transfers still a thing? Well, the reason that this question is still posed is because in 2026, due to the advancement of technology, football clubs rely heavily on data and they have access to statistics and video footage of players from all over the world. For example, you could probably go onto YouTube right now and watch a video compilation of Gilberto Mora, the 17-year-old Mexican teen sensation, which is something I suggest you do expeditiously, by the way. And due to the increased use of data and statistics in football, football clubs tend to track players for months or even years before signing them. And what's become very important nowadays in modern day football is the profile of the player, meaning what kind of characteristics and traits does the player have? For example, is he a good dribbler? Can he header? Does he tend to try and create opportunities or try and shoot for goal? And ultimately, can this player fit into the club's style of play and ethos? So basically, all of these things have to be taken into account before even tabling a bid for a footballer. So let's be honest, top football clubs all over the world don't just buy players on a whim, with the exception of maybe West Ham United, Chelsea, and Barcelona from 2017 till 2021, who just bought players rather recklessly and ran the club into massive debt. Sorry, I digress. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of scouting, debating, analyzing that takes place before a club even tables a bid for a player. Because nowadays, the biggest clubs in the world all have scouting departments and transfer committees, which are normally made up of a few experts, obviously. Well, does that answer the question? Do post-World Cup transfers still happen? Wait, just hold on, I'm getting there. Let me explain. Well, the thing is, firstly, World Cup performances can either decrease or increase a player's value due to something called recency bias. For example, players like Igor Thiago and Julian Alvarez had massive interest before the 2026 World Cup. And both of these players were getting quoted at astronomical transfer values. But due to their average performances at the 2026 World Cup, there has definitely been a decrease in the transfer value that clubs are willing to pay for them. And players who have genuinely had good seasons and a good 2026 World Cup have seen an increase in their value, like Norwegian duo Antonio Nusa and Andreas Schilderoop. I hope I said that right. Luka Vuskovic from Croatia, who got a 46 million transfer from Tottenham to Brighton. Jan Diamonde from Ivory Coast, whose club, Red Bull Leipzig, declined a 100 million plus bid from Liverpool, by the way. One can even argue that Elliot Anderson's price definitely increased when he moved from Nottingham to Manchester City due to his performances and regularity in the England World Cup 11. And then there's the most famous recent example, which is Enzo Fernández, who moved from Benfica to Chelsea for 100 million plus after the 2022 World Cup. So the thing is, generally a lot of football clubs use continental competitions and World Cups as a yardstick, because at club level players play in totally different circumstances, tactics and even styles of play than when they do with their national teams. So now clubs basically use this as a yardstick to determine whether the player can play in a different system, adapt to situations and do well in a different setting. So yes, World Cups do have a massive influence over the transfer values of football players. Now, as a side note, don't get too confused with transfers that happen before and during the World Cup, because these type of transfers were normally done ahead of time in advance, and they would have been done regardless of whether the player has a good World Cup or not. Such as Ismail Saibari, who moved from PSV Eindhoven to Bayern Munich, Anthony Gordon, who moved from Newcastle to Barcelona, and Nathaniel Brown, who moved from Frankfurt to Bayern Munich. These were all basically pre-World Cup transfers. Anyways, I digress. But does this still answer the question? Is World Cup transfers still a thing? Well, in short, the answer is yes. Though it might seem very counterintuitive that a World Cup, which only comprises of a few games for most teams, may actually entice certain clubs to sign certain players who do well. These type of transfers do happen nowadays, but they are genuinely outliers. For example, internet sensation from New Zealand Tim Payne got a move from Wellington Phoenix to Olimpio in Paraguay, which is actually a big step up. World Cup sensation and 40-year-old hero from Cape Verde, Vozinha, got a lot of interest from some European clubs after his hero performances at the World Cup, and we'll probably see a few more happen over the next few weeks. But the reality is, yes, these transfers do happen, but not on such a big scale or not as sensational as they used to be like back in the day. Even if we look at some of the 2026 World Cup breakout stars who got themselves transfers to bigger clubs, such as Australia's Patrick Beach, who got himself a move from Melbourne City to Troyes in France, and Manzambi from Switzerland, who got himself a move to Aston Villa from Freiburg. And even some of the breakout stars who are getting a lot of attention and interest from bigger European clubs, such as South Africa's Mbekezeli Mbokazi, Gustavo Puerta from Colombia, and Gilberto Mora from Mexico. All of these players were actually playing really well and having standout seasons at their respective clubs even before the World Cup began. So when a club has interest in a player, they do tend to look at the World Cup performances, but their performances at club level tend to outweigh the World Cup performances when all things are considered. In conclusion, and in my opinion, yes, World Cup transfers are still a thing. However, it's not on the scale like it used to be 10 to 15 years ago. Let's hear from you guys. What do you think? Are World Cup transfers still a thing? Yes? No? Maybe? Please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching another episode of TAMFC, where we break down football developments holistically to inform the opinions of football fans and ultimately make it easy for viewers to digest.